Welcome to the first episode of Healthcare Conversations, a podcast where we explore healthcare matters together, one conversation at a time. My name is Nkele Matsuso and I'm your host. And today we are diving into the evolution of clinical research over the last 2 decades with a very special guest. Joining me today is Dr. Babalwa Mahulwana, fondly known as Dr. Babs. She started her career as a research physician, transitioned into medical affairs, and is now the CEO of a local medical research organization. Her journey offers unique insights into clinical research and how it has transformed through technological breakthroughs and what it takes to lead in this rapidly evolving field. Dr. Babs, thank you very much for joining me. I'm happy you could join us. And having had a relationship with PSM personnel for so many years, we thought it would really be a privilege and an honor to have you as our first guest on the episode. Welcome.
Thank you, Gele. Thank you for the invite and for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I'm also looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with your journey. You began as a research physician, then moved into medical affairs, and now you lead a medical research organization. Congratulations, by the way, one more time.
And congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you. Could you walk us through your career progression and how each role shaped your understanding of clinical research and the industry in general?
So I like to describe my career journey as an eat-all-you-can buffet with different elements. Because to your question, every aspect of the journey has informed something in terms of my understanding of clinical research. Having started as a research physician in a small research unit in the Eastern Cape, and then ultimately coming into the pharmaceutical industry under patient safety or pharmacovigilance, which is then where I started, and grew into medical affairs through scientific project management and even marketing. I then went back into the clinical research environment, looking at clinical development, and then later on in my career also transitioned towards clinical operations and quality. So I've seen, even within clinical research, multiple phases. But what's important for me then to highlight is that clinical research is only a part, albeit a very big part and maybe the most pivotal part of the entire value chain of medicines, which starts with research and development and goes all the way up to then post-marketing, whether it is post-marketing product availability, quality assurance, and then access, which we know is all important. So I've been exposed to clinical research from those multiple angles in terms of different job roles, but then also from different responsibilities as far as the stakeholders are concerned. So I've worked in a sponsor environment. I've also worked for sponsors that then run their own CRO teams or clinical research organization teams, or the oversight teams, as it were. And just like the beginning of my career, I'm now back at the coalface, which is actually dealing with the participants on a site level. And that's the organization that I currently lead.
Oh, wow. That's actually lovely. So having been in the healthcare industry for more than 2 decades, which you have seen quite a number of changes in terms of technology, what are some of the biggest shifts in clinical research that you've witnessed during this time?
Indeed, Nkele, more than 2 decades is quite a bit. Of course, you wouldn't say so when you look at me.
Of course, for those who can see Dr. Babs, because we are on audio, we are not on video, definitely you wouldn't say so. She's as stunning as she was 2 decades ago.
Why, thank you. Sometimes you have to fish for these compliments, especially at our age. Anyhow. So what has seen and would be the case in 2 decades, major shifts, especially in terms of technology. And I maybe want to focus on 3 separate themes, starting with digitization, then looking at the biotech space in general, and then ultimately social media, because then there's different ways in which the different aspects of the stakeholders have been affected by these technology advancements. So from a digitization point of view, I'll maybe just point out a few examples from the sponsor or the CRO point of view in terms of how we've moved from everything being paper-based, as it were, where you filled in the participant data, where now there's even avenues to do even direct data input into the databases. And one of the advantages with this is that it actually minimizes the human error as well. So then if you look at monitoring or oversight of trials, whereas traditionally the CRAs or clinical research associates, who are the monitors that come to site, would come 100% in person to site. Now there's been a shift in terms of even enabling remote monitoring. Which is facilitated by technology. And from a sponsor point of view, even the training and the investigator meetings, even the mandatory training like your good clinical practice and ethics training, whereas historically this would have been face-to-face, now have moved into the virtual platform space. So in line with really the rest of what's happening in the rest of the industry. Critically, though, is the impact on the patient or the participant, in that some of the shifts that we've seen, whereas previously we would have paper diaries, now an example is where we then supply, the sponsor supplies participants with devices where they then input their own symptoms onto these devices. And of course, that comes with its own challenges in terms of even literacy being one, especially in our communities. And secondly, the infrastructure, whether it's power, whether it's data, keeping the devices charged, and then the availability of data, that is mobile data. So those are just some of the key challenges in relation to the sponsor and the participant. So I wanted to talk about biotech and engineering and the evolution that we've seen in that space. And we've seen this more recently in COVID, where some of the existing technology or the engineering that existed, for example, from your HIV vaccine development work, was very rapidly translated into COVID vaccine development, by translating really the same kind of engineering and the same kind of technology. And this is part of what enabled the development of COVID vaccines so fast. It managed to accelerate that entire process from a science and an engineering point of view. But then over and above that, we saw new collaborations or new collaborative frameworks where you would have two biotechs or a biotech and a traditional pharma company collaborating with an academic institution. So suddenly collaboration became a big thing, and some of them are cross-sectoral and more than just collaboration between two or three companies. You saw entire ecosystems now being formed to enable us to accelerate how we were going to tackle this global health crisis. So that is a big one in terms of what we've learned from COVID. But then, of course, around the same time, with the advent of social media, we got a mixed bag in terms of the positive and the negative. In that positively, with social media now, it's much easier for communities to be educated or to be research literate, to understand what clinical trials actually are about, and to get education in terms of the different disease areas, so people understand a little bit better about their own conditions or the conditions that we're trying to prevent. But then also at the same time, we know and we saw that social media fueled any other possible myths or misconceptions or misinformation. And those are lessons that we need to actually go back and analyze so that we take them into the future in terms of how we develop clinical trials in the future, especially then in vaccine development, because there's still a lot that we need to do to increase confidence in vaccines.
Great. I just want to make a follow-up on the COVID side. Okay, yes, true. I mean, even as an outsider, I could see how social media had its own positives and the negatives where COVID is concerned. So what other lessons did we learn from COVID? That would be my first question. Secondly, are we finding that more people are now participating in clinical trials since COVID? You know, people learned about clinical trials then. Are we finding that we have more participants than before?
So maybe I'll start with the second question. And the answer is probably yes, in terms of facilitating the understanding.
Yes.
We have always run clinical trials through community advisory groups or community advisory boards who would then be the custodians of the information that we take to the various communities that work very closely with sponsors to then engage communities so that communities better understand the work that is being done. But like I said, with COVID and social media and everybody having a vested interest and in fact having a say, whether educated or not, as we know, people certainly got more and more interested. It's become easier for people to understand what you're talking about. So you don't have to start from A in terms of saying what is clinical, what is clinical research, because this is South Africa is a mature clinical research community as a whole, and I would think that COVID facilitated that.
It helped a lot,
Yeah,
because I know that at that point people were talking about, but there were no clinical trials done on this vaccine, like you were saying, negative and positive messages that on myths that people were talking about.
But then in terms of the lessons, I think for me, I've already spoken to the collaboration in the ecosystems, and this is something that speaks to the sustainability that we need to forge going forward. If you look at a topic that is very close to my heart, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs.
Yes.
And the SDGs 17 actually looks at collaboration for the goals. So it's going to be critical going forward. But for a country like South Africa, one of the things that it highlights, and for somebody who's then trying to conduct relevant, cost-effective, ethical research, is what I hope to see more and more in the future in terms of how our clinical research is actually aligned to our public health priorities.
Yes.
As a country.
Yeah.
So we need to be speaking to the public health policy frameworks in terms of what is most urgent and prioritize accordingly. And this was done very well in COVID. For example, the networks that were at the forefront of HIV prevention work were the first to put up their hands
for COVID,
to say that we're going to be on board. And that's all the way down to the investigators on the ground.
And how ready are our investigators for the advances in terms of technology? How advanced are they already?
And part of it is that advantage from COVID. But then, like I said, South Africa is very, very mature. And South Africa is a mature and attractive country for clinical trials, and I mean global clinical trials, and we've always participated in global clinical trials and actually done very well as a country because we've got world-class scientists and investigators. They really are up there and compete on a global level. I can even share a bit about, maybe use two examples where South Africa has really shone. I mean, COVID is one of them where we know that even our variants, remember when the variants were coming out,
one of them was discovered in
identification and the
South
sequencing
Africa.
happened in South Africa. But more recently, and again, very, very close to my heart, is groundbreaking research done with one of the sponsors in the HIV space where there is now a new PrEP or pre-exposure prophylaxis injection that is a twice yearly injection that has been found to be 100% effective. And South Africa was a massive contributor to that research,
Oh, wow.
including the chairs. So the chairs, who are the key investigators in terms of developing and running that work, came from South Africa.
So it was a global.
It was a global
trial.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And South Africa was
contributed
contributing
the most and the highest.
Is it because we have a high rate of HIV in our country, or is it because of our technology and our expertise?
So it's a combination of factors, really, because whereas we know the infrastructural challenges that we do have, but we've been working with sponsors for many, many years in terms of developing our sites. I'm thinking back to my old days of the initial HIV prevention work that we did previously in the microbicide space, where we were not only engaging the communities, but actually developing the sites in terms of the infrastructure that would be required to run world-class trials. So the infrastructure is now there. It's cemented, it's well established, but then it's the competency of our scientists, our investigators, in terms of their understanding of science and really being at the forefront. I recently attended the AIDS conference in Munich in July, and South Africa had a massive Team SA, it made me so proud to see.
Just listening to you, I'm like so proud.
Because it wasn't only researchers or scientists, it was activists, it was patients on the ground, and a massive contingent from government, all the way up from the deputy minister, all the way down to the MECs across the different provinces. And
they all attended.
They all attended because the message was South Africa needs to show up at the forefront, because we have been at the forefront of especially HIV and AIDS. But that is not the only, and this was facilitated to the work of SANAC, or the South African National AIDS Council. So it's not only that, it's also the fact that South Africa generally also has a high burden of disease across. So it's not just infectious diseases. It's the case with non-communicable diseases as well, whether it is obesity, whether it is diabetes. And we're doing a lot in the country in terms of cancer research. So the disease burden is really what drives global companies to look at South Africa. Because this is also where the solutions are needed. And also the infrastructure then enables. Hence, I'm pointing to the combination.
And do you find that with the disease burden and the different kinds of diseases that trials are being done in South Africa, do you find that in terms of the participants, it's also, I know earlier on you said we've got communities involved and we've got participants. There's been a growth with regard to participants. Do you find that it's also diverse? It's across the board from rural to urban?
Definitely. Because we have seen, so maybe first for me to highlight that there's different kinds of sites or different kinds of models of running the clinical trial. So there are hospital-based sites, which means that those sites have got the captive audience in the hospital in terms of hospitalized patients. Obviously, we've got GP-based or practitioner-based clinical sites, so where the practitioner is already has a pool of patients to include in clinical trials. But then also where I've been involved is community-based research, where we actually then source participants or approach these communities. And that is why most of the time we have been involved in preventive work, because then you focus on a healthy population, but where you know that the risk is the highest, which takes you then really being competent in terms of mapping your own epidemiology. So how high is the prevalence or the incidence of a particular condition in that particular community? And what is great with community work is that it then forces you to have a very robust stakeholder relationship with government, because you will find that your bulk of participants are then treated at public health facilities. So you have to have a relationship with the district, you have to relation with all your local facilities, all the way up to provincial, which then enforces what I was talking about in terms of integration of clinical research into the public health agenda of the country. So community-based research for me has been, I think, the most rewarding tool to be able to facilitate that.
Oh, that's great. And I'm learning so much. Really learning so much. But on the other hand, I'm beaming with pride as far as our country is concerned, where clinical research is concerned. So I'm very proud. I know as a country, we face resource constraints, like many other countries would be facing resource constraints. How do you see technology addressing these limitations? And what are those limitations as far as resource constraints are concerned?
Look, we know and we've known as a country, and that was now even before the current crisis that we have of unemployed doctors, so I don't even want to go there. But we've historically had challenges in terms of our resource constraints in that whichever field you're looking at, even in general or primary practice, is that there's always an overwhelming number of patients to doctors. So the ratio has never been right. And some of the interventions that we've seen recently, and I think this has been rewarding to see, even if it's mainly in the private health space, we want to look at how we can then maybe scale that up, is that we've seen the introduction of telehealth, which has been helpful in terms of starting to address that burden. But then also home-based care is now at an increase in terms of its adoption, which then takes away the burden from our hospitals. But like I've already highlighted, this is mostly in the private health space. But then also there's the technological aspect of it, which is growing, and one would want to maybe see a little bit more of, where if you consider a disease like diabetes, that would require intense education, which ideally should happen between at least a nurse and a patient, or a pharmacist and a patient, or a doctor and a patient. Now, think about the resource that's required in terms of the time, in terms of the expertise, where we've had for a while companies that look at patient management, which is remote, in terms of supplying educational materials, of availing call centers, or even just remote educators that will then take the patients by the hand in terms of their journey
when they start, I guess.
Where they start to say, and it can be, like I said, like a call center, and certainly these things can be developed into apps, and they have been developed into apps to assist with the different patient journeys. And I'm not sure in terms of where we are, whether this is already at the diagnostic phase, but definitely from a patient management, this is something that really is helpful. So technology has been very helpful in terms of that. But also just with technologies I've worked extensively in diabetes, as you are aware, where the devices are built in such a way, for example, if you look at an insulin pump, that then monitors the blood levels, the blood glucose levels of the patient, and then already knows how much insulin to administer. That's all thanks to technology.
Most of the people who would be diabetic patients could be an older generation. How clued up are they with using this technology?
That is, I think I've highlighted this when I was talking to the example of the devices, which were for symptoms, or we call them e-diaries. And these were already some of the challenges that we're picking up, because the first one is literacy. Because most of the systems would obviously be designed in English. And then, yes, sometimes if you do have a process where you can have something translated, but these will be English-based. And literacy, as we know, in this country remains an issue, or remains a challenge. So there's that. But then there's also issues of dexterity. I mean, you don't type as fast as... your children,
the younger generation,
right? The younger generation.
Now, what about the 70-year-old?
Because the dexterity is not the same. And then there's the visual issue, and therefore the room for error, and. So as much as technology is there, we all need to remember that technology is merely an enabler.
An enabler, yeah.
And there's a lot of education that there needs to go into it to enable us to maximize how we leverage all the technology that we have available.
Sure. South Africa has quite a few of its own challenges from what you're saying here. As a COO, how do you balance the push for innovation with maintaining the quality and integrity of clinical trials? Is that something that you always have to look into?
Fortunately, this is one of those contexts where South African institutions are tried and tested. Like, thank goodness we have such robust institutions because we have safeguards in terms of those systems in our ethical framework, where we've got research ethics committees, either the independent ones or even being overseen at a national level. So that is firmly in place, and therefore we can never deviate from the ethical standards that we need to pursue. Similarly, your good clinical practice is an international standard that all of us need to adhere to. And what is really special that has been done by our regulatory authority, SAPRA, is that we have SAGCP, or South African Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, recently revised in 2020, that have really done an amazing job in terms of customizing the guidelines for South Africa in terms of what is relevant to South Africa as a population, but also the unique challenges that we face. And therefore, with that framework, there isn't a chance, and the global sponsors know this as well, is that as much as it's always desired to run efficient trials, but we all know that recruitment should never come at the price of data integrity and data quality. Yes. And those principles are cemented within good clinical practice. And we firstly self-audit ourselves, but also we get monitored by the CROs and the sponsors.
Yes.
And then ultimately we get inspected by SAPRA. Well.
This is now from a research organization point of view, your side.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It happens for sponsors as well.
For sponsors as well, I guess.
Get
and CROs?
And CROs,
obviously, they also get inspected as well.
That's correct.
Okay. I like that. So these are some of the changes came with the inception of SAPRA, obviously.
From with the transition from the Medicines Control Council
to SAPRA.
Yes.
Okay. This is quite interesting. What unique leadership challenges or opportunities do you face in South Africa compared to other markets as far as clinical research is concerned, or research generally?
It really is summing up all of
everything
that we've already discussed, especially in terms of the challenges. But I really want to look at opportunities for South Africa, also based on what we've already spoken to in terms of the disease burden and the fact that we've got such an enabling regulatory environment.
Yeah.
Our own regulator, SAPRA, actually has a mandate for capacity building and therefore assists sites in terms of fulfilling this mandate. And I think this will only bode well for South Africa going forward, in terms of just increasing our own capacity to run more research. And the academic appetite. I mean, we also know about our academic institutions, which are also world-class, which are often featured very, very high in terms of global rankings. And if we can do more of what we've learned from COVID in terms of really collaborating well from not just the clinical research, but from a science and an academic output, I think we can only go further.
That's quite interesting. You keep mentioning our academic side of the health system. And at the beginning, you also mentioned that your career has been like what did you call it?
All you can eat buffet.
Okay. And it has spread from research to medical affairs to now back in research. And I can hear how you also are talking so passionately about our academic side as well. Is that something you would consider maybe at a later stage?
And that's why I referred to the buffet, because in a buffet, you can have a really, really good buffet where everything is good. Or you can have a really good buffet, but then your taste is towards one thing. And then you really just want to niche yourself, right? Because there's many areas of specialization within this, firstly, the value chain that I've spoken to, but also within clinical research, many avenues to specialize or to increase the depth there. And academia is definitely one of them. Or, and as much as I do have some academic aspirations, is that you can also take the whole buffet and do what I did and maybe find your passion in just leadership.
Yes.
For me, I'm obsessive about empowering future leaders, which is one of the reasons capacity building speaks so strongly to me as well. But then that's empowering leaders from different spheres, and definitely we need to empower more academic leaders as well.
Would you say that is one of the things that excites you more about the future of clinical research or healthcare in the country?
I find it very exciting in terms of the academic potential, right? And I'll give you a real life example. When I got my current opportunity, I was straight out of business school, having finished my master's in corporate strategy. And everybody was asking, including the business, so are you going to do a PhD? And I argued that, well, first of all, maybe I don't need to urgently do a PhD because I already have, a doctor title. But more importantly than that is that when you're working in research, you are already in the context to actually drive your own research and ultimately publish your own research, which means you make a scientific and an academic contribution anyway.
Yes.
So that's what made it so attractive to me. But then the second part is the policy framework from a public health point of view that I already spoke to as well, because we've got policy frameworks that exist in this country that have got key targets. So whether it is the National Strategic Plan that looks at multiple focus areas and how we can then translate or integrate research or our imperatives and mandates into that strategic plan. And we remain globally relevant. Now, you can't go anywhere globally where you don't hear about sustainability. Sustainability is everything in terms of looking at sustainability for the future. Yes. So we've got these SDG goals for 2030 that we're looking at. And this is not just unique to clinical research. It's every responsible corporate citizen has got to look at their business a little bit differently.
Yes.
In terms of how do I actually play within the sustainability space. And not for show and not just for ticking a box, but really adopting responsible corporate citizenship.
Actively being involved. Every company has to do that.
Yes. Yeah. So that I find extremely exciting. And incidentally, that was, so my topic in my master's was within the sustainability space, looking at strategic collaborations and ecosystems.
Oh, wow. So that is now your passion, basically.
That is my heart.
And
of course, the sustainable leadership.
Yes.
That is required to drive such an agenda going forward.
I know also you mentor some of the young professionals, which, like you say, sustainable leadership, it's part of it. If you were to offer one piece of advice to healthcare professionals and researchers who are joining the industry, who are starting up now, what would that be?
So I would say, depending on who you are, because we've got different type personalities, right? There's those of us who know what we want from the get-go. And even in that case, though, if you think you know what you want to do, research as much as possible about it. Definitely, the clinical research space is a very viable space for an actual career. So you can already go in intending to build a career in this space. And like I've highlighted, there's many opportunities within that space. Or if you are like me, You can go into the buffet like curious to say, oh, I'm just going to
Let's sit
nibble a
here.
little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then I'm going to see how it comes together, as has been the case with my career. Because I use my growth mindset to say yes to being exposed to
Different
everything.
opportunities.
And seeing how that was going to come together, how everything fits together. But also what that's enabled me to do is hopefully to add value in different spaces. So if you think about the mentorship that I do now, I'm able to mentor students who are in the construction industry.
Construction.
Because when I mentor, I don't only mentor on the context or a particular industry, but on leadership in general and personal leadership. So I'm able to do career mentoring across different industries. And because also the mode that I use or the framework that speaks the most to me is values-based leadership, which you can really employ
everywhere and anywhere in any industry. Wow, this has been quite an interesting chat. I enjoyed it. I learned quite a few things. There were those that I knew in terms of clinical research, and there are new things. But above all, my takeaway from this is how proud I am of South Africa where clinical research is concerned. I really am. Thank you so much for your time. For listeners, if you found today's discussion enlightening, be sure to subscribe and join us for more as we continue exploring healthcare matters together, one conversation at a time. This was an interesting conversation. We're going to have a lot more of these conversations with people in the industry. The final thought you want to leave us with, Dr. Babs?
A call to action for leaders whenever I'm given the mic to do so. That if you consider yourself a leader in any space, my only question is, who are you mentoring?
Perfect. I love that. You are asking all leaders to reflect and to take action. Thank you very much, dear Bulela.
Thank you. Where's the click?